Welcome to the Connected Leaders Academy virtual conference designed to reshape your vision of transformation. As we navigate the evolving business landscape, our speakers will unveil innovative strategies to manage and initiate change. Prepare to adapt, innovate, and lead, ensuring your role as a catalyst in this transformative era.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are in the world. I like to say good hello from the future because I'm in Brisbane, Australia, and we're usually ahead of everyone else's time zones. It's so great to have you here. I'm so excited about this Reboot conference. You know, Alvin Toffler said, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those that cannot read or write. It will be those that cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And so today I'm going to be talking about how to do that, which is through the process of reflect, review, and recalibrate. And I don't know about you, but I've had to do this many, many times in my life. And I expect I probably will have to do it many more again. My name is Kylee Leota, and I am the founder and chief vision officer of Elements for Success. And the name of my business was named after Earl Nightingale, who was one of the original professional development gurus, who said that success is the progressive realization of a worthy goal or ideal. And that was a definition of success I could get my head around. And we all know that for each of us, it's lots of different elements that make up what that success will look like for us. I'm probably at risk of sharing my age here, but there was a song in the early 2000s by a group called Chumbawamba, and the chorus used to say, I'll get knocked down, but I'll get up again, and you're never going to keep me down. And I think one of the challenges is it's not only what else is going out there into the world that is knocking us down, but we tend to do it ourselves and to ourselves at times. There is a Japanese saying that says, fall down 7 and stand up 8 times. And that was about striving for more and about never giving up on hope. And I know that hope is not a strategy, but without hope, there is no strategy. And in fact, just as recently as a few weeks ago, Gallup put out a poll, and they were just trying to figure out what followers wanted from their leaders. And it was astounding that 56% of people said that they wanted hope. That's what was actually driving them to stay in their environment, to stay in their workplaces, to stay without leaving their jobs. And the next one was trust. But trust came in at 33% compared to hope, which came in at 56%. So huge. So when we get into this, one of the things that I really struggled with when I was on my own journey was, what did reflection actually mean? I felt like it was a bit like in school where we were taught we should study, but we weren't given explicit instructions on how to actually do that. So I felt like I was wandering aimlessly, a bit like for me, meditation. If someone could actually ever teach me that properly, I think that would be someone I'd pay a lot of money to, because one of the things that we need to understand is, firstly, there's a lot of what you should do, but no one explicitly teaches you what to do. And then there's the other idea that it's not a one-size-fits-all model. But as I've reflected on my own personal development journey, I found a couple of tools that were really helpful to me as I was moving through. And I thought I'd share a couple of them, and hopefully they'll be helpful to you. There's an amazing person called Byron Katie, and she talks about 4 questions that you should ask yourself. So in any given situation, the first thing that we need to do when we're looking at reflection is, what is actually happening? And Byron Katie says the first thing that we should ask ourselves is it true? And I'll give you a perfect example of this. I was in a job that I was loving, I was enjoying it, and by all accounts, doing a really good job. And one day, someone came in and told me that my contract wasn't going to be renewed. And the stories that were going around in my head about why my contract wasn't going to be renewed were awful. I wasn't worthy, I wasn't good enough, I was terrible at my job. And then the second question Byron Katie says was, is that really true? What evidence do you have that actually proves that what you're thinking about is actually true? And in that moment, I had this overwhelming need to continue this old narrative, but I made myself pause and really stop and think about it. And in actual fact, what I learned from that experience was I had been in a situation where anyone that will know me knows that I'm a pretty strong advocate. I have a very strong social justice lens. And I realized in that moment that the new leader that had come into the organization may have felt confronted by that. So he was removing barriers to allow him to lead in the way that he wanted to do. And in that moment, he saw me as a barrier. But had I continued with this negative thought of I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, I'm not doing a good job, how was that actually helping me? What was going to be the trajectory for me if I was going to continue that thought process? And that's kind of Byron Katie's third question. And then the fourth question she asked is, who am I without that thought? So who am I without that thought that I'm not worthy? Who am I without that thought that I'm not good enough? And in actual fact, it was through this process and some of the feedback I had been given as to why they weren't going to continue my contract was in actual fact the reason I actually got my next job. So I think it's a really insightful process that sometimes we have to stand back and separate our emotion from what's actually happening and be able to hold space for our thoughts and our feelings, but without being consumed by them. The next part of that process is now that we've got an idea of what to do and what reflection looks like, is how do we move into a review process? And, the truth is, our brains are wired for negativity. We know that the research says that we need between 5 and 7 positives to counteract every negative that we hear. So it's not a one-for-one match. You just can't have one positive thought that will just negate those negative thoughts that you're having. And I do this exercise with my clients, which I love in part because it's really, really powerful. Also in part because it makes them squirm a little bit because I can see them changing those neural pathways as we're doing this activity. And it's really simple. We draw a piece of paper, we draw a line down the middle, and on the left-hand side of the page, we write what's working well. And on the right-hand side of the page, we write down what's not working well. And our immediate response is we want to sit in the what's not working well category. We want to get over into those negatives. But I make people do this one first. What is working well? And then the second part of that is how can we do more of that? And when we get into the other side, when we finally sat with that, and I had a client one day and I hadn't seen her for a while, and she had one thing on her what's working well. And I said to her, in a whole month that I have seen you, you can only tell me one positive thing in the whole entire month that I've seen you. Come on, let's have a bit more of a think about this, because her brain just was defaulting to all of the negative things she had. I could have given her 5 pieces of paper to fill out that side of the column. So we sat with that. What's working well? And how can we do more? How can we snowball and build on those successes that we're already having? And the tricky part is when we get over to the what's not working well, my caveat to that is without judgment. How can we just hold space for what's not working without falling into that inner critic, without falling into that judgment, and without falling into that negative spiral that keeps coming and coming and coming like an endless to-do list? And once we look at that without judgment, what's not working, it allows ourselves to focus on what we need to do to change, reduce, or eliminate. And then it becomes a simplistic, pragmatic process to create those little shifts that we need to do. Moving forward onto that is then how do we recalibrate? How do we take the actions what are the next actions that we need to take? What are the behaviors that we need to change? Or what is the learning that we need to acquire that's going to close that skill gap for us to allow us to get to that next step in our journey? And I wanted to share with you a little bit of a story about that, because my journey has been one of reflect, review, recalibrate. I've lost count of how many times that I've had to do that. And I think one of the things that people say to me is, Kylee, there's so much going on. Where do I even start? The world is just exponentially busy, it's chaotic. And, one of the things that you'll hear people talk about in motivational words is having a word of the year. And I think there's an aspirational word of the year, and mine is around activation. But really, what I'm hearing from people is by default, the universe seems to have created its own word of the year, which is hectic. I haven't known anybody that has started their year that hasn't had this really hectic start. So, how do we not get swept up and consumed by what's going on out there? And how do we come back to ourselves and work out what we need to do? And for me, that came through some really, really harsh lessons. One of them was that I had to navigate family and domestic violence. And I remember sitting there with the police after a particularly serious incident and going, what is happening with my life? I have done work on myself. I had done self-development. I had I had a degree, I had a qualification. How with my education and my learning and my hunger for learning did I end up in this position? And so I started to go on one of those negative downward spirals that I was talking about earlier. And through my work and through my learning, what I created for myself was my own model. I remember sitting in a psychologist's office and with no disrespect to psychologists, not all psychologists are created equal. And unfortunately, I had somebody who was doing more harm than help. And I remember walking away from that going, I can't do this anymore. And so, over a course of a few years, I created my own model. And you will have heard from many people in this summit today about how people have used leadership to create and navigate change. And we know that in order to lead others, whether that be personally as a parent, in your personal life, or professionally, that you first need to lead yourself. So I created this 8-pillar program that I'm going to talk you through very, very briefly today, and it's called Infinite Leadership. And each of those letters in the word infinite has its own pillar. And I have used this multiple times, not only to recalibrate myself from my DV story, but also when I had a serious injury in 2019 and I had to recalibrate my life into what I was even going to do in a job when I could no longer go back to the role that I had only known, the only role I'd ever known in the past 20 years. And so I had to go back and find who I was. So the first pillar that I love to talk about is identity. At our core, who are we? And there is an amazing gentleman by the name of Vusi Thembekwayo who said, identity is man-made, so thereby it can be man-changed. And that was so powerful to me because it meant that these identities, like a DV victim, was an identity that I could change because it never really sat well with me. Certainly was an accurate description of my experience, but it wasn't an identity that I wanted bestowed upon me. And we've all had identity, whether it be the talkative kid in class, the class clown, the lazy person, the whoever, the difficult one, the sensitive person. We've all had identities that have been given to us, and we've all absorbed stories to create our own narratives. But who is our identity? And if we don't like our identity, you actually have the power to change that. We need to work on our strengths, our values. We need to recalibrate. And most importantly, we actually need to have a really honest conversation with ourselves about who we are right now. And is it in alignment with where we want to be? And what are the aspirational attributes of those people? And what do we need to do to keep that evolution going and creating that identity for ourselves? The next pillar I call nurturing. And that's where we're looking at our emotional intelligence and our emotional agility. And one of the most difficult things that I talk about is that theory into practice process. There is so much information out there about self-awareness and understanding our feelings more. But so many people still struggle to take it from knowing ourselves and what we're feeling and actually being able to apply it in meaningful ways to get the outcomes we seek. Timothy R. Clark, who does a lot of work in psychological safety, even builds on Goldman's emotional intelligence framework, and he actually adds in self-regard and social regard. And so that is so important because if you have a very low opinion of yourself, how open are you going to be around your self-awareness? If you're walking into a meeting with low self-regard of everybody in the room, how does that impact how you're going to show up? So we need to do the work on ourselves to be able to navigate how we interact with others. And there's just no way around that. And that agility piece, Susan David talks about our emotional agility. And that's so important because it stops us from getting hijacked in the moment. Fearlessness, fearlessness from my perspective is not the absence of fear, it's the ability to move through it. And the Native American buffalo is the only animal that we know that when a storm is occurring, it actually runs towards the storm. Not because it loves storm, it's because it recognizes that unlike other animals that are trying to outrun the storm, it eventually catches up to you. So by facing the storm, by facing that fear, you go through it, you get through it faster, and you get to the other side. And I think that's so powerful. And there are so many different types of fear that we have to navigate. And I think we talk a lot about fear of failure, but we actually don't talk about our fear of success and how that can be limiting to us in achieving our full potential. Innovation is the next pillar in that, and that's that ability to rethink, to be able to implement, be curious, be intentional, and to model the way. Playing small does not serve the world, and we often hold ourselves back by not allowing ourselves to be creative and innovative, and get the growth that we are capable of receiving and achieving. The next one that I love to talk about is this concept of nobility. And I'm not talking about the old days of the kings and the queens, but I'm talking about what does noble leadership look like? And in my case, I talk a lot about ego-free leadership. Egos are such a huge barrier and they get in our way to being able to show up and really lead to our full potential and to be able to serve others to our full potential. And I think so often, if we can just remove our ego from the equation, which means we have to go back and do that work on our identity, our nurturing, our fearlessness, and our ability to innovate, that everything is so intertwined. So we need to be able to navigate that, and we need to be able to move through that to get the outcomes that we want. The next pillar that I talk about is influence. And influence is not only just how we communicate, but foundationally, how do we create psychological safety? And psychological safety, like many buzzwords like authentic, has this risk of becoming tokenistic. We know that psychological safety is around creating a sense of inclusion, which means about belonging. I can walk into a room, a conversation, a space, and feel like I belong there. Being a learner, we are going to be able to make mistakes. And as a former educator, we used to encourage our students all the time to just give it a go. But as adults, we don't give ourselves the same grace, and we don't give other adults the same grace that we are learning in this process. Contribution safety, to know that our contribution is valued. And challenger safety is where I can actually stand up and have a different opinion from you and know that at the end of that, we are still going to be okay. And we know that organizations have an obligation to provide that. But equally, how do we provide that for ourselves? How do we make sure that we are creating psychological safety for ourselves? And that goes back to understanding our identity, understanding our strengths, understanding our triggers, understanding that emotional agility. How do I create belonging and inclusion for myself? How do I create a learner framework for myself that allows me the grace to know that I am going to make mistakes in this journey and how to move through that and recalibrate, just like those buffaloes moving towards the storm? How do I recognize and acknowledge myself and the contributions that I have, and then that to really acknowledge that I have something to say and to give, because in doing that, by giving myself permission, I in turn give others permission to do the same. And challenger safety. I don't know about you, but my inner critic is far greater than anybody else's opinion of myself. And so how do I challenge those thoughts when they occur? And how do I recalibrate and reframe those thoughts when necessary? And after we get through influence, we need to also understand that this transformational journey is the fact that it's an ongoing evolution. Our legacy is something that we create regardless of whether or not we're actively seeking to make a legacy or not. I had someone once say to me, "Oh, I have absolutely no intention of leaving a legacy. And the truth is, consciously or unconsciously, you leave one. So we need to be really conscious and mindful about when we're gone, what does that look like? And that legacy is not just when we pass, it's when we are going onto a new journey, a new role, a new job. And part of that is that succession planning. We need to be able to, the best leadership is that the ship will still drive in the right direction, regardless of whether or not you're at the helm. And that sustainable leadership is going to get that transformation. So, because people will know how to reflect, review, and recalibrate in that transformational process. And the last pillar, with the first pillar we started with, which always starts with self, everything that we do always starts with self. The last pillar that we identify in that infinite leadership model is ecosystem. Who do we surround ourselves with? And I talk a lot about in our ecosystem, we know that I actually hate the word balance. I find it so difficult. I'm terrible at it. And so I talk a lot about harmony. And we know that the best ecosystems are the most harmonious ones. And so how do we create that? And that's harmony between our personal life, our professional life, our health goals, our financial goals, our work goals, our family and friendship goals. And I liken it to a symphony. To create the most beautiful symphony means that everything is playing in harmony. And if something is playing too loud or too soft or too fast or too slow, it means that our symphony is not going to be the most beautiful example of what harmony looks like. And so in order to activate our symphony, everything has to be playing in alignment with each other and in harmony. And the most valuable part of that is we know that we can't do this journey alone. We need to ask and we need to have that ecosystem around us. And one of the biggest lessons that I have learned in recent years is that some people are going to support us to the level of their comfort. So who are those people in your ecosystem? And how often do you do an ecosystem audit and look around the room and decide, are those people helping me and supporting me in my ecosystem? Or are they depleting my ecosystem? Are they making it incongruent? Are they making it unharmonious or inharmonious versus creating that harmonious life that we look at? And Tasha Eurich talks about the people that we need to surround ourselves and not the unloving critics, the people that find fault in everything that we do. We're not looking for the uncritical lovers, the people that find no fault in what we do. We're looking for those people in our ecosystem that are our loving critics, the people that are going to be our champion and cheer us on and celebrate our success, and also challenge us as we're navigating this journey. I have had many experiences of what I call the kid in the pool. I had this experience of someone, I had to dive into a pool and save someone. And then in order to lift themselves up, they needed to push me down. And I said, don't be the kid in the pool. Be the person in the elevator shaft or the mine shaft that we see in the movies that are linking back to back and helping each other out of that situation, because together that we can rise together. And there is enough experiences in this world to share, and the best success that we can have is by creating this infinite opportunities for infinite learning and infinite possibilities. And we do that by working together to create a harmonious world, to create that for everybody and each other in this journey. So thank you so much for joining me in this summit today. It's been such an amazing experience. And my name is Kylee Leota. My business is Elements for Success. And I hope wherever you are, whatever you're doing, you are working towards progressing those worthy goals or ideals to create success for yourself in your own personal journey. Thank you so much.
Thank you for participating in today's enlightening session. As we transition to our next expert, remember that each strategy and insight is a step toward becoming a transformative leader in your field. Visit connectedleadersacademy.com to stay engaged and informed. The journey of change is ongoing. Let's move forward together.